You are listening to the Logos broadcast with Fergus James Murphy. Brian Barry's with me today. He is the digital GAA editor for Sky Sports. He's also a local man. He's a fellow Coola GAA. Player or former player? Do you still play?
Player. I haven't been forced into retirement yet by the dodgy hamstrings, but then again, a standard might force me into retirement now sometime soon, but hopefully we'll keep it going for another while.
Good stuff, yeah. So I must say I'm a former player, but I'd love to come back. You're a hurler more than a footballer?
Well, I suppose, yeah, 2 left feet, so I keep them away from any balls. I'll hit it with a stick anyway, alright. So
good stuff. Well, we're going to look at this past decade in Irish sport, and you have not a bird's eye view, you're right in there in the thick of it, more specifically in GAA, in your job, but you have a view on all things Irish sport, more than most people probably.
Oh, I don't know about that, but it's kind of the 9 to 5 anyway is focused on keeping abreast with things Irish sport. Not to say my opinion is any more relevant or probably a lot more incorrect than anybody else, but anyway, I keep abreast anyway. Let's say that. So
great. Well, let's get going. So we're going to start with soccer. What stood out for Brian Barry in Irish soccer between 2010 and 19?
An Irish lens. Well, I suppose it's late 2019, so we can't mention probably the legacy of this decade is going to the tremors of it will be felt for the next 10 years probably in Irish soccer, and we don't, since the FAI accounts and everything like that, and everything that might be come out of that. But I suppose internationally straight out is the 2 European Championships we qualified for. 2012 was obviously a 16-team tournament, and we drew our way there under Giovanni Trapattoni. We'd got bad luck in a few playoffs for a few years, but we drew Estonia in the playoff, wasn't it? So the less said about that, the better. When we went over to Poznan and Gdansk and got it handed to us by Croatia, Spain and Italy, but since then, like, Trapattoni did a job. He came in and cleaned up after the Stan era and the catastrophe, but he just defensively solid all too well. And then O'Neill came in and kind of did plateau, and Trapattoni stayed for one campaign too long, but O'Neill came in and he actually, what we hadn't done in 10-15 years was actually win games, like, rather than just the 1-1 victories or the 0-0 victories that we used to always get. So he got a few big scalps in his time, obviously, beating Germany, beating Italy at the Euros, albeit a second string Italy team. But on an international front, that was probably it at Euro 2016 and getting into the last 16, even though per se we didn't get any further than 2012 because it was still, we were relative more or less the 16th team in the tournament.
Exactly.
But I suppose in terms of just to feel good and actually the terms in which we exited, we probably exited on some more respectable terms. We even had the hosts and the tournament favourites, France, on the ropes in the last 16. Didn't quite get over the line, but it was so that. In terms of domestic game, I suppose you can't look past Dundalk and what they've achieved. Won all the cups and leagues the last few years, bar a small break in that by Cork City, but and they're running Europe as well, which I suppose in terms of pound for pound was hands down the best Irish soccer sport and achievement this decade. Just getting into the group stages and holding their own and getting a few results. I know Shamrock Rovers did it as well under Michael O'Neill in 2011, but in terms of just the resources at the display of the league and everything that goes with it, and they're going up against bigger teams, better resource teams, better funded teams, which soccer is all about, unfortunately, and that's the bottom line. So actually going deep and holding their own in Europe was hands down, I'd say, the best Irish sporting achievement on the soccer field.
Grand, we'll move on. It's funny, we talked about inverted commas a foreign sport first, but
the Garrison games.
It is a mark of. It indicates how big soccer is in this country, and it has been for many years. But let's go to Gaelic football. What has been the highlight in your opinion in this decade?
Well, we can't go anywhere without mentioning the 5 in a row, I suppose. So we were just mentioning there a moment of the decade. It's probably not a moment. It's just been a 5-year progression. Dominance is the right word, I think, for Dublin. They came into the start of the decade, near the start of the decade in 2011. And once they got over, and they were underdogs in that game against Kerry, but since then they've been going in every year as favourites, and they were a bit like, not wishy-washy or flaky is completely the wrong term, but they weren't as consistent, and they weren't in 2012 to 2014, those 3 years. They probably should have won 3 of those years, and they only won 1 in 2013. And 2014, I suppose, obviously was the genesis of that team. I think it was that loss to Donegal was what shaped this team and what ensured they would win 5 in a row.
Really?
Looking back, it was kind of the catalyst. Jim McGuinness's Donegal team caught them on the hop. They weren't equipped to play against a defensive system, and everything that's followed after was a culmination of that, and they said that's not happening again. So they actually, in a lot of the crunch games in 2015 and 16, while they were improving, they didn't come across these ultra defensive teams at their peak, so to speak. It was kind of the Kerrys and the Mayos who were really putting it up against them, fighting fire with fire. But in 2017, a very good Tyrone team re-emerged, and they hammered their way through Ulster. Hammered the fancy Donegal team, hammered down in the Ulster final, and made a mess of Armagh in the quarter-final. And they went into that semi-final, and people were saying, here, this counter-attacking game that's rocking for Tyrone at the moment is really going to trouble Dublin. And Dublin they were too wily. They just said, 3 years ago we lost to this team, or basically in Donegal, we lost to this style. We know how to play around it now, and we know how to be patient, and we're going to, Keane O'Sullivan was the centre-back, and he sits in the pocket so we don't get caught in the break. And they just sat back for 2 or 3 minutes while Tyrone had possession, got a quick turnover, bang up the field. Conor Callaghan got a goal into the Hill 16, and they hammered them.
Bob's your uncle marries your auntie.
Exactly.
Tell me about the hurling. What happened in this decade?
It was, if the noughties was, I suppose the traditional powerhouses dominated the noughties in terms of Tipperary, Cork and Kilkenny. It was a much more democratic decade, we'll say, in the what do we call this decade? 2010s, 2010s.
Yeah, it's weird.
It's so there was Kilkenny got there. It started off still 1-4 the first 5 All Irelands of the decade. Well, I suppose 2010. So they won 4 of 5 in a 5-year gap, and Tipperary won 3 in between. But at the same time, the playing field was levelled a bit. Clare got in and 1-1. Limerick got in 1-1, and Galway got in 1-1. And it's actually in a very healthy state in terms of a broad landscape. It's like going into 2020, there's 9, and it has been the case for the last 2 or 3 teams, that there are 9 teams going into every championship with a realistic ambition of winning Lee McCarthy. So
would Dublin be part of those teams?
Absolutely. I think Dublin are a team at the moment that I'd probably say, do I think they will win Lee, or they can win Liam in 2020? I'd probably say no. I think they can beat absolutely anybody on their day, and they showed that this year, and they beat Galway. Are they ready? Would I be surprised if they are? I think they're certainly capable. They beat the previous year's All-Ireland finalists, and they got caught by Laois on the day, and that was probably a bit of mental fragility and everything. But you saw the Leinster Championship this year. 4 teams finished on 5 points. Dublin, Galway, Kilkenny and Wexford. So they all beat each other essentially, apart from Wexford, who drew with everybody. But now, probably if I had to pick kind of a moment of the decade in terms of hurling, it's probably top level hurling was the All-Ireland semi-final weekend in 2018. It had been such a brilliant championship, I suppose, and it was wide open, and all the kind of the big teams, your Tips, Corks and Kilkennys, Cork were still in there, but your Tips and Kilkennys, who dominated for so long, were out of the picture, and it was anybody's All-Ireland, although Galway were kind of favourites coming in as reigning champions. But it was the first year that the GA by design had put the 2 semi-finals together, so it was almost like a festival of hurling in Croke Park. And the Galway Clare game on the Saturday evening, it went to extra time, and there were some magical scores now, and it went to extra time. It ended level after back to Thurles next week, but the next day going in, everybody was saying, geez, if we get half the game we got yesterday, we're in for an epic. And it was better again.
Oh my goodness.
Cork and Limerick played out a cracker. Limerick won after extra time and went on to win the All-Ireland, but it was it was just more of a festival of hurling. But I suppose you probably can't look at hurling and say it's all rosy in the garden in terms of half the country plays it, but half the country, it's like you could arguably say the game is dying in the second half of the country, and it's kind of being kept alive, but it's on life support, I suppose. So probably a different highlight of the decade in terms of a neutral perspective was Lochiel Shamrocks, the Antrim club, winning the Club All-Ireland title in 2012, just because it's up there, it's got that pocket in Antrim, but the GA, like Ulster hurling is not always properly served correctly, like Antrim hurling, for instance. Like it's a power that they're capable of getting to the top level in terms of like what they have. They have the clubs. Okay, there's a basket case with Casement Park. There is the hurling tradition, I suppose.
Yeah.
But they got to an under-21 All-Ireland final a few years ago in 2013, I think it was, and they were playing Wexford.
Yeah.
And the neutral venue was deemed to be thirless. Like that was an opportunity that's an opportunity to bring it up to just get an All-Ireland under-21 hurling final up in Newry, up in Armagh, something like that. That it actually really,
Sloan. Is there one called Sloan? Is that a stadium?
In Clonus.
Clonus.
There we go, up in Monaghan.
Jeez, that's shocking.
But something like that, up and that's an opportunity. Again, Derry got to an All-Ireland hurling semi-final at under-21 level 2 or 3 years ago. Played Kilkenny in a neutral venue in Thurles. Like, go figure. Like, at least.
Come on, yeah.
Schlockneil now are playing Ballyhale Shamrocks in an All-Ireland semi-final next month, and that's going to be in is it in Newry or I think it's in Newry. So at least there's bits like that, but look, it's been a brilliant, don't get me wrong, it's been a brilliant decade for hurling at the top level, but at the same time I think it's remiss not to mention the other side of the coin in terms of that's a beauty of it, I suppose. It was Laois had a great year, but you'd be looking in the next few years and hopefully the next 10 years to see your Laois, your Carlows, your Westmeads taking the next step, and then the tier behind them taking the next step up again, because that's the next challenge for hurling, I suppose, because like
they want everyone to be, no one to be left behind, basically.
Absolutely, yeah, and we're looking at, and we're losing Offaly, like, which is sad in terms of they're gone down to the third tier now for 2020, but at the same time we shouldn't just keep Offaly in life support at the expense of other counties. Your Carlows and your Laois have shown consistently over the last few years that they are, like, they're performing and delivering results consistently higher than them, so I don't think they should, Offaly, the sanctity of Offaly's spot in a Leinster Championship or anything should be protected at the expense of any other counties, but at the same time, we can't afford to lose any more counties.
Well, moving on from the GAA to rugby. Tell me, what was your highlight of this decade?
The people's game, as it was aptly coined there a year or two ago, but I suppose, well, to your look, it's probably the decade will be remembered on a macro level for Ireland's failure at World Cup, the 3 World Cups in the decade, and failure to get past the quarterfinals. But I suppose on a more, just a highlight from an Irish perspective on field achievement was probably, like, Leinster they won their Hurling Cup in 2009, but they weren't the force yet that they were going to be, and they came back again and won 2 in a row in 2011 and 12. But the competition and the Irish provinces both had their problems throughout the decade, but in terms of the English and French kicking up, moving the goalposts, losing interest perhaps in the tournament. But in 2011, I think the on-field highlight was Leinster in the Hurling Cup final. They were against Northampton in Cardiff. They were getting it handed to them at half time. I think it was 22-7. Game over. They were getting scrummed off the field. They were just, it was only going one way, and Johnny Sexton kind of grabbed the game by the scruff of the neck fairly famously, and they won 33-22.
Wow.
The ultimate game of 2 halves, but he was kind of young at the time, and any ex-players who were in the dressing room said that he gave a speech and a half anyway, and then he led from the front on the field. So that was probably, in terms of, they came back the year after and they defended it. They kind of made light enough work of Ulster in the final, but probably on field, that was the achievement. Obviously, like, in terms of moment, the final day of the Six Nations in 2015 was fairly special as well. When Ireland beat Scotland, they didn't know whether they had enough, and they were waiting on the result in the England-France game. And obviously the Grand Slam in 2018, beating the All Blacks twice in 2016 and 2018. But probably for a lot of people there is an asterisk over that they beat New Zealand 12 months out from a World Cup, but New Zealand were just getting their house in order and they played 12 months later or 11 months later in Tokyo, and that was kind of the defining result anyway between Ireland and New Zealand's kind of rivalry over those few years. But no, for me, probably on-field in that moment and achievement and performance, I think that second half from Leinster against Northampton was hard to beat.
Tell me now about the World Cup, because there's a funny video, and we had a chat on the phone a couple of months ago, and you said you knew the fella on the news, and he typified, I don't want to kind of misquote you, but what was the cultural phenomenon that you observed as part of the World Cup?
I suppose, well, it wasn't just me. I suppose there was, like, I think Ewan McKenna kind of writes fairly extensively on this, and I think it's certainly there. A lot of people do agree with him in terms of rugby country or the team of us, etc. That, like, a lot of people don't relate to rugby, and that's fine, but a lot of people did feel that, and they wouldn't particularly say I'd 100% subscribe to this notion myself, but a lot of people did feel not alienated by the team, but it's a team they couldn't relate to, it's a sport they couldn't relate to, it's
an experience they don't.
It's no secret that the majority of players do come from a small bubble of private schools, etc.
And a few other cities.
Well, look, even in, like, Limerick is probably an outlier in terms of world rugby, in terms of that it's not predominantly a middle class sport. But if you look at Galway, you look at Cork, you look at Belfast, the majority of elite rugby players do come from a small select group of schools, of private schools. So it's I suppose that kind of did feed into, and there was a lot of literature written back and forth about it, that people were saying it's like it got brought up on an RTE highlight show. Your man Dara O'Brien did float it to a panel saying, is it now the people's game? Is this the sport of the people? When in terms of it possibly is in some pockets of the country, but in other pockets of the country where people only know GA or only know soccer, or it's, they're kind of saying, hold on a sec.
The one thing it does have over the soccer, sorry to interrupt you, but the one thing it does have is we succeed more than in soccer, so maybe we like to celebrate it more on some occasions, like today with New Zealand, but that's only a little flash, you might say, because
well, of course we're more successful in terms of like on-field achievement, in terms of, but I'm just playing devil's advocate here. I'm a big Ireland rugby fan, but just in terms of the devil's advocate, some people might say it's only a 9-team sport, really, 10-team sport.
It's true.
In terms
that's the truth.
So in terms of soccer, we're consistently in around 30th to 40th in the world.
Out of a few hundred. Like.
But yeah, there's over 100 teams that are play to a meaningful level, I suppose.
Yeah.
So if you flip at that and look at rugby, and they say there's only 10 elite teams kind of way, and we never get past the last 8 of a World Cup of the top tournament, even though here, flip side of that, we in our own right got to the top of the world rankings before the World Cup. So there's I suppose there are those arguments, but no, absolutely, we've won European Championships, won Grand Slams, and we have been heavily successful in the sport as well. Even if there's only 6 countries in Europe who do play it, we've been the top country in Europe and won those tournaments as well. So there's the flip side of that. So
you mentioned someone going to the Aran Islands and other places. What was that, the fella you were talking about, Bunin?
No, that's actually in today's. What are we? Today's the 21st of December, so a plug for the Irish Examiner today. But I'm looking forward to reading it. I bought the paper, haven't sunk my teeth into it yet, but there's a piece on it, kind of examining like places like in Leitrim or something where rugby isn't strong or something. Is it actually the ripple effects of this phenomenon, if you want to use that, or is it actually is rugby kind of hitting it on the ground there, or what people, or is it treated with indifference or apathy, or are people aware of it, or were people supporting it during the World Cup and etc.? And no doubt they are. It's the same as anything. We saw last year when the Irish hockey team did well, we were all hockey experts, like when in the late 80s when the Irish cyclists Sean Kelly and Stephen Roach were going well, the country went cycling mad. We were all mixed martial artists apparently there in the middle of the decade when Conor McGregor was doing well. So that's just the nature of Irish society, I think. And not that we're a bandwagon nation.
No, we're on the same side though, yeah.
We like our own doing well kind of way.
And there's only a few of us. We're a small country. And
exactly,
so
absolutely.
we unite easily.
Yeah.
In that sense.
Yep.
But with the rugby, as we were saying,
it did alienate some people.
Exactly. Well, this is going even more extreme than rugby then, because cricket is even more, I suppose, select purely in terms of numbers and socioeconomic standing of people who have an interest in that maybe. So what was the highlight in the cricket?
Well, yeah, no, we just chucked this down on the list because I suppose it was, like, we beat, didn't we go out to the World Cup in 2011 and beat England, which was probably kind of compared at the time as England going out and beating us at hurling or something, so we bet them at their own game, so yeah. I think I'd kind of be remiss not to mention that, and perhaps some of the greatest sporting highlights, I suppose, of the decade, given just that it is, like, in terms of playing numbers, one of the biggest sports in the world. Like, yes. It's massive in India and Pakistan and these places with vast populations. So, yeah. And we did punch above our weight and actually beat one of the heavyweights of world cricket. And Irish cricket, I suppose, has made strides over the last 10 years in terms of got test status, etc., and going toe-to-toe with some big nations, and the likes that England are actually happy to play us in test matches, or these big countries are coming and playing us in one-day internationals and stuff. So it's, I suppose, as I say, remiss not to mention it kind of way. So
fair enough. And again, it's funny, I don't want to overstate this, but again, golf, not everyone in Ireland plays golf, but we do identify with some big golfers. So tell me about what happened in Irish golf, or for Ireland's golfers in this decade. Well,
a raft of majors, really, probably on paper the most successful ever decade for Irish golf. So you mentioned relating to some people and not others, probably raises an interesting question in golf, because, like, here, look, it's December 2019 and people are kind of reviewing the decade and saying, here, look, what was the standout achievement? Perhaps it's recency bias, but a big thing that's coming up is Shane Lowry winning the Open. And like, of course, he's one of the most likeable elite Irish athletes, absolutely. I think people look at him and they kind of, he's relatable, he's friendly. You go on his Instagram and every day, like, he'll be kind of up, he'll be watching, cheering on Irish athletes and other things. He's watching a Premier League game saying, go on Seamus Coleman, or he's watching the rugby team, or he's watching the darts during the week with a load of
us.
Yeah, he's an everyman kind of way, whereas I suppose, like, in terms of, but I read a piece by Kieran Shannon in the Irish Examiner last week, who was saying Irish athlete of the decade across any sport, it's not even up for debate. That is Rory McIlroy. He won 4 majors. He's consistently been ploughing away in on the PGA Tour and picking up titles there as well. And he's actually in golf, which is a global sport. He's been arguably the top golfer worldwide over the span of the decade. So that's no mean feat. And perhaps he's not as lauded in Ireland as Lowry is, for instance. Which raises the question. Maybe, celebrate is the right word, I suppose. In terms of Lowry won 1, and that's not taking anything away from Lowry, but McIlroy won 4 majors, and why, I suppose, isn't that celebrated? And sure, there's no beating around the bush. The fact that he's from the north, I suppose, and that he does have dual loyalties, or so to speak, that he does feel that he might be part of Great Britain, and he might be, the United Kingdom, and he's also from Northern Ireland, and he's got that Irish element, and that's the thing with athletes, full stop. We've seen that in boxing as well here, and Carl Frampton perhaps isn't as praised, and it's fine. It's the nature of the beast, I suppose. I heard other people talking about, is it perhaps the things that McIlroy does off the course, in terms of he played golf with Trump, he avoided the Olympics due to the Zika virus, he blah blah blah, like there are other aspects, I suppose, to why he mightn't be as popular. But look, in terms of, regardless of how popular he is or how many people out in the street in Dublin might be cheering on his name, the fact of the matter is he's won more majors than anybody else, and like, it's in raw achievement, it's hard to argue with. Shannon's piece the other day saying that there's also Darren Clark and Graham McDowell won majors earlier in the decade, and they have to be kind of mentioned as well, I suppose. So it's a fairly fruitful decade for Irish golf.
Could you say golf is Ireland's strongest sport?
Certainly a case to be made, horse racing, I suppose, as well, even though I wouldn't, my Paddy Power account would attest to the fact that I'm no expert on the horse racing, but But yeah, like horse racing, there's a case to be made, but golf is right up there in terms of how high we punch on a global stage. So
Yeah. Well, let's go to boxing. And Katie Taylor, who has encountered various toils in her own private life, she has been incredibly consistent, hasn't she, over the last more than 10 years. So anyway, from that highlight in 2008, was that a highlight, but where did Irish boxing go from there? It was 2008, wasn't it, in Beijing? No, jeez, it was 2012. What am I saying?
She won in 2012.
Sorry, forgive me. 2012 was when all that happened. So take me through the decade.
Yeah, I suppose. Well, Katie Taylor, I suppose, put Irish boxing on the map in terms of put women's boxing on the map. Like, she's kind of heralded as one of the main reasons why it got Olympic status, and she certainly backed it up in the ring with her performances in London in 2012. Took the bronze medal home, and that in itself is one of the greatest kind of achievements, Irish sporting achievements this decade. But then she went pro, and she's cleaned up all before her. It kind of goes to show just in the last year or two that she's really not only just become a kind of an Irish phenomenon, but actually she's been started celebrating. The UK have picked up on her in a big way, because Matchroom Boxing have signed her up, like with Eddie Hearn, and she's, first of all, she was on a lot of Anthony Joshua's cards as the co-main event, etc. But she's starting to headline cards herself as well now, and she's actually, people are appreciating it, and like, I suppose it's the rise in popularity of women's sport over the last few years as well. But she's really headlining it, and she's really the poster girl for women's boxing worldwide. There were a lot of, particularly for her first few fights in the pro game, there were a lot of kind of comments saying some of the best female, well, most of the best female boxers in the world are in the amateur game, so why would she go there? But it's actually shown, and she's had a few real battles with Delphine Peterson, namely over the last few years, and there's a few big fights, Amanda and Cindy Serrano coming up, and there's a few big opponents left in the coming months and years for her if she wants. But she became a two-weight world champion. She unified her first division, and she went up and won another belt then. So there's no arguing with kind of her achievements and how she carries herself outside the ring too.
Yeah,
she's winning fans without what we see, the trash talk in boxing and in the fight game that others have done. I suppose that's what people get as well, that she's very humble, and she's not.
She is.
She's not. She doesn't draw the limelight. She's quite reserved in person, but she's. You see her. You saw her in the Late Toy Show there a few weeks ago. Like, that's the kind of the young girl who's a boxer, and she came in and she gave her the present, and she said, "Come over and I'll do a training session with you." And true to form, that kind of popped up on her social media channels this week.
Really?
But she doesn't look for the limelight in terms of, she's not saying look at me or which a lot of, maybe it's probably a financial thing in terms of boxing, but a lot of kind of pugilists kind of feel the need to and feel it's a necessary part of the sport, and possibly it is to sell themselves, but she's kind of selling her fights and growing in popularity without doing that. She's doing her talking inside the ring, and then with her humility outside of it.
And I remember I wasn't there, but I remember seeing the pictures of her homecoming to Bray. I think it must have been in 2012.
In 2012, yeah.
And it was a massive thing. Like, it was a huge celebration, because she's seen as a Bray, a woman of a girl or a woman from Bray. You know, she's not this kind of distant elite who went off to England when she was 15, like some soccer players. You know, and she's really connected with that area.
But I suppose she was probably only the second, like, really kind of Irish sportswoman ever to be held in that breath after Sonia O'Sullivan, in terms of celebrated so widely, and we're probably almost taken for granted given how much, like, popularity of Irish women's sport has skyrocketed in the last 2 years even, and just the rise in attendances at ladies football finals, etc. But in terms of, like, it hadn't really happened before bar Sonia, I suppose. We had a good swimmer in the 96 Olympics whose reputation was probably a bit tarnished over what transpired afterwards, and with Katrina McKiernan and a few other athletes who kind of weren't at that level, I suppose. But in terms of a global level, Katie was up there with Sonia O'Sullivan, I suppose, but Katie did get over the line and get Olympic gold, which, as we know, doesn't happen too often these days for Irish athletes. So but again, like if there is one kind of athlete to challenge McIlroy in terms for, like, the Irish athlete of the decade or sports person of the decade, is certainly Katie Taylor. So
that's nicely put. And, well, to go to darker elements of Irish boxing, I just, again, I was out to the National Stadium. Today's the 21st of December. Keela tonight are playing in the National Stadium.
Do you have a ticket?
I would love a ticket, but I don't have one.
We'll keep the ear to the ground the next few hours. So.
I went last year with my brother and it was fantastic, but it's a funny place. It's called the National Stadium, but it's a kind of it's a little bit like these soccer stadiums, like you have Talca Park. It seems a little bit tired or a bit neglected, unloved maybe. So that was my own experience of that stadium. But tell us about boxing in Ireland. What's going on there on the ground?
Well, I wouldn't be a complete expert on boxing, but just in terms of a kind of macro level and a few, like, sometimes it's difficult straight out time zones and where the big fights are. So sometimes it's not always heralded in terms of publications mightn't send and media houses mightn't send journalists to go to what are sometimes massive fights because they might be on the west coast of the States or something. Sometimes just not financially viable. So you saw kind of Andy Lee winning a world title, and it almost caught the Irish media and Irish sporting public off guard. There wasn't like, he had the world title fight, but there wasn't a massive hype all week in the lead up to it in terms of, wasn't on everybody's lips in the same way if there was in the same way that Bernard Dunn when he won the world title in 2000 which was this decade as well, actually in 2011. So I suppose we should, or 2009 that was, sorry, the previous decade. But that was at home, that was in the Tree Arena. But Irish boxing hasn't had the big home event since. Even Katie Taylor hasn't had a pro fight in Ireland. But I suppose also a lot of the kind of the fanfare around Irish boxing has decreased due to the kind of the controversies with MTK and their media ban, and then that's been lifted, their media boycott has been lifted, but there certainly are scars there, and there's relationships cut, ties and everything like that. So what happened was that the boxing promotion company fell out with, or weren't happy with aspects of reporting by the Irish media on a few of their events and a few ties, which perhaps, and suggestions of where their money came from. So, well, let's call a spade a spade. There was a shooting at a boxing fight in the Regency Hotel. That was the start, was it? That was kind of the genesis of it, and there was a bit. There were a few suggestions that money in boxing is coming from various different quarters, I suppose. So and what kind of quarters? Or maybe you want to be careful here, but I'm going to keep pushing you. Well, I suppose the talk is that it's coming from the Kinnans, coming from the drugs industry in Ireland at the moment, or the drugs trade in Ireland, and there's money coming in from there. But MTK, they announced that they wanted fair news, and that's why they boycotted the Irish media, and they instructed a lot of their fighters to boycott the Irish media, which in essence, the only loser there was boxing and the boxers, unfortunately. Like, boxing is a minority sport in Ireland. It's not, it's not GA, it's not rugby, it's not soccer that's going to be in the back pages every week. It's, so they're always battling for publicity, and something like boxing where they crave publicity. I mentioned, talking about Katie Taylor, that most boxers really need the publicity to sell their fights and create a bit of fanfare around them. And so basically there's almost a media blackout of these guys. Some of the top MTK fighters are fighting somebody like Carl Frampton, somebody like Mick Conlon, so these guys like that. So and here, look, it's over now, but I suppose, as I say, there are some scars there still in terms of relationships between the Irish media and those who were instructed to boycott them. So does MTK oversee all the boxers or just a few? No, it's in terms of, if you're a boxer, you can sign for anybody. It's like any individual sport, you sign for different agencies, etc. So, Ryan, tell me about the phenomenon around Conor McGregor. Well, I mentioned there earlier that we're a great nation for not a bandwagon, but I suppose in that case I would call it a bandwagon, to be honest. Well, I suppose it was the very definition of a bandwagon, but I do think it has had a legacy too. You see Bellator, who are a secondary kind of mixed martial arts promotion, coming over and selling out the Tree Arena 2 or 3 times every year now, and there are kind of a next wave of fighters, I suppose. But mixed martial arts wasn't a thing really in Ireland. You'd see the UFC on the telly the odd time, you'd see Brock Lesnar and Chuck Liddell, but you wouldn't, like, for me anyway, it wasn't something I would have been mad into before. And then Conor McGregor comes along, and but there's no athlete in the world that sold themselves better, like more effectively over the last few years. And Irish people have a particular knack straight away of jumping and liking to see Irish people do well. And of course, like, all of a sudden, if you're going to an away game, like, it's not like you're following the Irish soccer team going to some less glamorous cities in Eastern Europe or something. You're going to the bright lights of Las Vegas if you want to see them. So, like, people kind of bought onto that, and there'd be 10,000-15,000 people going over for a fight for the weekend in Las Vegas. Well, for the, I think there were two big ones where UFC won 8-9 against Chad Mendes and 194 against Jose Aldo. Those two, there were big numbers there, you know. So it's, and the ole kind of been rang down the Las Vegas Strip, but just in terms of people responded to him, and he became a global phenomenon, really. Just in terms of,
but
like,
people
because
ask
his
me,
trash talk and his
they say to me when I go to America, they say, "Oh, you know McGregor," and I'm so angry because I don't like the sport. I don't judge it, but for him to be the ambassador for Ireland in America is, for me, disappointing. But it's the truth.
Oh, it's absolutely. People all over the world. He's the most famous Irish person on the earth right now, bar none. Like, so he's but then the other thing is, here, look, he's rubbed people up the wrong way too. There's plenty of kind of there's a book out this Christmas that's kind of pointing out the other side to him. But in terms of, like, people kind of went off him because he didn't hold him to carry himself as well as he could have in press conferences, how he sells fights. He threw in racial slurs. He called a guy of German descent before he was fighting a Nazi, called him in a tweet. He kind of made other insinuations in the lead up to the Jose Aldo fight against Nick Diaz, and against a guy called most recently against Khabib Nurmagomedov, who that guy rubbed him up the wrong way, and the fight was over. But some of his previous opponents had kind of realised that this is just to sell a fight. The other guy, perhaps he insulted him a bit too deeply and got close to the bone, but your man wasn't just happy with tapping him out. He jumped the cage, and he had a go at McGregor's team afterwards, and all hell broke loose. There were riots in the arena between fans and everything, you know, and that's just, it went too far. It wasn't.
Well, that's when you mix. For me, the problem with UFC is it's not about the sport; it's about all the other stuff. At least with real sport, and what's the definition of a real sport? I don't know, but there is definitely far more of an emphasis on the bloody fanatical nonsense around.
It's show business as well.
That's all that it is. That's all I'm saying. Yeah.
Like, it's a highly skilled sport. Don't get me wrong. Like, the bread and butter, and they train probably more disciplined than most athletes, and they need to keep their weight down, and they need to. Yeah. But at the same time, you're right in terms of there is a bit of, I'd like to say, needless fanfare, but perhaps in that environment and in that space, it is unnecessary in terms of selling fights. But
like, there's plenty of worthy pursuits in an athletic arena, and this thing, I know, again, I'm interrupting you, but I just have to say, like, in August 2017, I was new to the United States, and there was about 15 tennis players sitting around a laptop watching a stream of McGregor Mayweather.
Yeah.
Not for free on cable TV, not on an illegal stream. We were paying $5 each to contribute, to chip into the pay-per-view. This was costing $50, $60, $70. I can't remember how much it was. But the thought of paying, you pay €80 max, or probably less, to go to Croke Park on All-Ireland Final Day.
Oh, yeah.
To be there.
Yeah.
At the national final. And for this, you're watching from your home.
Yeah.
And some people are paying. How much does it cost usually? Do you know?
To go for a fight, it can. So I was
to watch on your computer.
Oh, on your so or normally TV. Here it's a bit cheap. Like, I paid for the Anthony Joshua fight against Andy Ruiz 2-3 weeks ago with a friend, and I think it was it €27. We split it two ways.
Yeah.
But that's a lot cheaper than the States. They're, like, as you say, they might go $60, $70.
But this was huge. This was the Mayweather McGregor. Do you remember?
Yeah, I was at it incidentally.
You were at that?
I was working in a journalistic capacity, so I didn't fork out. But the great pity of that was the arena was half empty.
Really?
People got priced out. Like, there was.
So they overdid it, maybe.
I was at a lot of McGregor's fights in the UFC as well, but 3 of them, I think, in Vegas, and people were there, but there wasn't any less Irish people in Vegas for the Mayweather fight. It was just less people at the arena, because you literally get priced out of it. Like, people paid, like, I think the cheapest tickets going on the day, and they were $2,000 or something, which was too much. And people like, and that did put me off McGregor a lot as well, in terms of, not that, yeah, look, I was always treaded carefully with him in terms of whether could really get behind this guy, but in terms of after he won the Jose Aldo fight, he did pronounce and he shouted out, "Ireland baby, we did it," and he held the tricolour aloft, and he said like after one of his other fights, when one of us go to war, we all go to war, and like it was all about like the Irish. He very much involved the fans that came over and travelled away, and then this time he took part in a thing that tickets were cheapest tickets in were probably $2,000, and that's like, I'm not saying the UFC tickets were cheap, but they were probably like a quarter of that maybe.
Okay.
Whereas people can, I'm not saying like 400 quid to watch a fight is completely stupid, don't get me wrong,
it's madness.
But for something that can literally last 13 seconds, but at the same time that's something that's like, there's a big difference between like, you can save up for a good few weeks and months, and you can take the hit, probably a 400 quid to watch a fight, whereas like if that's something you really want to do, whereas $2,000 people just, nobody can, like, unless you're super like it's stupid money to throw away and watch what was a bit of a charade. Really was the only reason it happened was money. It's like you come from a tennis background, and people kind of saw two like sports, okay, they both hit each other in the face, but it's two completely different disciplines. It's probably Roger Federer going over and playing the world's top badminton player, say, like, is probably an apt enough description. Like, it wasn't like, it was just a money making exercise and a bit of a publicity and like stunt, and it was everything like that, and they build each other's brands, so it made sense for all parties. Was it a sporting phenomenon, or was it a great? I don't think so.
Should we celebrate this guy? I don't think we should. But anyway, that's...
No, well, I don't think so. And I like, in terms of, I think he's crossed the line in terms
anymore,
of...
do we? We don't really back him as much as we did.
Well, I don't think so, and I think that kind of put off, like, whatever about people are into MMA and people want to support their own and see an Irish person at the top of the game, but in terms of just the average person on the street, I don't think that air of goodwill is there as much if they see somebody throwing out racial slurs or
throwing a thing in a bus or whatever.
Yeah, or like to sell a fight, anything like that. Yeah, exactly. Throwing trolleys at a bus. I was at a press conference covering one of the fights where he started throwing cans of Monster and water bottles and at his opponent Mick Diaz and his camp, and it was like, people are just like, to be honest, we don't like. That's why Katie Taylor is the absolute antithesis of that. Like, she goes in, there's no bravado outside the ring, and she goes in and she does the fighting, whereas, or she does her boxing rather than fighting, and McGregor goes, is the other thing, and he goes, and perhaps he does things to sell fights that doesn't really sit well with the layman and the person walking down the street who wants to see Irish athletes doing well, so.
Yeah, so he's an interesting one, because we don't necessarily classify him as an Irish athlete, do we? But he is in many ways. It's a funny topic, McGregor. Yeah, he's in a weird situation there. We just spoke with all these different sports in Ireland.
Yeah.
And as you said, you focus on the GAA. But how did you get into your current job at the moment? It's in a new industry, a changing industry. How did you get into sports journalism as you are?
Right. Loaded question. Well, no,
so you went to college in Cork.
Yeah, so I studied a degree in law and Irish in UCC, which was a very good backing, really, in hindsight, I suppose. Like, in terms of law isn't strictly part of journalism, but then again, journalism isn't, it's not like nursing, or it's not like medicine, or that you need or an architecture, that you need a very specific course to do a very specific job. Like, in terms of, there's a lot of transferable skills that I did in my law degree that might kind of benefit. You do a lot of writing, obviously, you do a lot of research, you do a lot of kind of questioning, you do a lot of...
It's thorough.
Yeah, exactly. So there's lots of transferable skills, and you keep it. So I joined an emerging publication in 2015 when I left college called Pundit Arena. And I worked with them for 2.5 years. It gave me great kind of experience, I suppose. Went from... That allowed me to actually branch out and do a bit of broadcasting with other things. So I did a few bits on RTE2, I did a few bits on TG Cahir, a few various radio stations as well, all the while writing with Pundit Arena. And we did a bit of broadcasting with Pundit Arena as well. In terms of podcasts and creating online videos, etc. So it was kind of very kind of broad backing, and I'd say a good start although I suppose like anybody you make mistakes, but they along the way. But sure, that's the beauty of it, and I keep on making mistakes. I think everybody does, but that's a good way to be. But yeah, no. So I worked with them for almost 3 years, and then in 2018 I joined Sky Sports. Job opportunity came up, and I said I'd take a different path. So it's a GA only, I suppose, role, and it's so I'm mainly writing on the website. So I always say I have a face for the radio and a voice for print media. So I'd be suited to the writing kind of way. So it's gone so far. Anyways, almost 2 years later, I'm still with Sky Sports writing away. So
man. Well, I don't think there exists a steady job in journalism anymore. So is that a steady job? Or how does that, do you know what I mean? What are your career prospects you don't need to be too specific about Sky, but your future, how do you see that?
Well, I
just can't see anything.
I'll give you a very broad answer to that. I think the future of journalism, and people are saying, like, they say when the people were working in canals, like during the Industrial Revolution and trains came in, they just said, like, the people weren't working in the canal industry, even though it became redundant. They were working in the transport industry, so they just needed to change it slightly. So, like, you mightn't be working in a newspaper, or you might be working in a newspaper or on a website or on a radio or on a TV station, and it's going to change. Has changed dramatically over the last 10, 20 years. Going to change even more dramatically over the last. But if you say you're working for a website.com, you're not. You're working in the media, and people are always going to want content and want news and want everything like that. It might shift the medium in terms of that they're consuming, but they're still going to want content. So I suppose you need to kind of keep broadly. That's through my like limited experience in the sector now, not even 5 years. So it's yeah, I suppose just moving forward, with the age everybody has a smartphone. How does that? It's changed how they're reading content, but we've seen over the last few years that people have, like, initially people weren't paying for content online and it's free for all. Then some publishers have come together. You've seen the second captains who went behind the paywall and it's really working for them.
Really?
You see
how many listeners are they getting?
I couldn't quote you offhand, but it seems to be working, and it's certainly viable for them. You see the Athletic have just come in from the American sports and went for a very hard launch, and their UK soccer coverage, and is working for them. So I think the moral of that story is people will pay for content if it's good, and they're happy. They're not just going to pay for the sake of it to read one article and click in. But if people think content is good, they're going to pay for it. But in terms of the same way that the music industry involved there, because people were downloading music and they just said nobody's buying CDs anymore. Music industry adapted and they said, you know what, let's do Spotify or let's do Netflix similarly, and for TV shows and movies, that people pay a small amount for a vast catalogue of things. And I suppose that's a way of one industry survive, because people said, how's music going to make money, because people are downloading for free? So I suppose, and this Spotify model or this Netflix model, etc., is how the industry reacted kind of way. So there's an example of how media can react, I suppose, to the new challenges that do face it. So
you're not worried about that?
Well, I suppose, look, I think everybody's like, well, you're certainly interested in how it's going to go anyway, in terms of how my career might progress. And you know, as I say, I'm not like a seasoned veteran in an industry in any way, shape or form. I'm only relatively new in myself, so I suppose a lot of more experienced people might give you a lot more experience and better informed answer, but that's how I kind of see the lay of the land at the moment. But it's certainly, even since I started in the media, like podcasts have blown up, for instance, or so there's new aspects all the time. Facebook Lives were really in vogue there for about a year or two, when Facebook was probably a bigger platform than it is now. It's probably decreased over the last 2 years, and it was a publisher friendly platform rather than they'd kind of, in terms of their algorithms and everything, and they were pushing things like that. So it's interesting like they're just examples of small changes that have come and gone over the last few years. So interesting to see how it is going forward.
Deadly. Well, again, I'm going to go back. This will be the last thing, because I want to know, how did you physically, you finished your law in Irish, didn't you start doing something in law? So how did you fall into journalism?
Or did you start doing? I didn't straight out of college, so I was doing a few bits in law during while I was in college, but it was always writing. I kind of knew from an early ish age I wanted to go into sports journalism.
So
I had a vague idea. So I was writing for various publications. I was doing bits and bobs. I was writing for the college paper. I went over just as a fan to Euro 2012, I remember, and wrote a bit of a fan diary and stuff, and I was, doing bits and bobs. And then with Pundit Arena, who I started actually writing with, I was doing bits of work with them while I was still finishing college and everything like that. So, and then I got a job out of that. So it was always writing, and there was always I didn't get into broadcasting until I finished college, in terms of, not that I do a huge amount of it, but I do it now and then. But writing is kind of the bread and butter, and it was something I was acutely aware that I wanted to do, and I was doing it throughout college. Yes.
Okay, so you have been on this kind of track for a good while, and here we are. So long may that continue. Brian, thanks a million for talking to me today.
Glad to be on it, Fergus, anytime.
Good luck.